This is Ali Vogel from Flexi Design, and today we are recording with none other than Rachel, a design manager at a popular e-commerce company in Europe called Zalando. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm originally from Chicago. I spent the first half of my career in early stage startups working on advanced technology topics. Everything from being part of a Google X startup in San Francisco, where we rethought what it means to design cities, to being in Tel Aviv, where I was working on smart dash cam apps just when 5G networks came out, thinking about how those can be utilized when it comes to safer driving. And then the second half of my career has been spent in design leadership, helping larger organizations think about transformational change and design as strategy. So spent some time at Klarna, where helped transition our app from being known as Just Buy Now, Pay Later, but into a shopping platform, taking a lot of inspiration from Chinese apps and super apps for some transformational change in the navigation and architecture structure. And then most recently, I'm at Zalando, where I'm leading our design innovation and strategy lab. So we are an internal centralized design team that's focused on making strategy tangible through design, always looking at what are the next 2 to 5 years out of our business looking like, whether it's through exploring new technologies, new user groups or mindsets, new business opportunities and verticals, understanding what's the opportunity space, where's there space to play, and how do we kind of get those foundations up and running.
You have had an incredible career. You and I met very early on, and since those days working at a startup, you have just flourished. You worked at Klarna, you work at one of the biggest e-commerce sites in the world, one of the leaders in Europe specifically. And you started your career at Google, which is no small feat, especially for the time that you were working there. You have a really interesting story. I think it's something that a lot of our listeners, especially the ones that are earlier in their career, tend to think about, which is how do I break into the industry? Whether you're coming from design school, whether you're coming from another field, or whether you decide to leap off into the industry and see where that potentially takes you. So I think people would love to hear how you got started, how this amazing career came to be, and what are some of your biggest tips for our listeners to be able to have a similarly successful career.
I originally went to an art and design school called California College of the Arts in San Francisco. I decided to go to design school, honestly, a bit of a whim. I'm shocked that my parents let me do it. Truthfully, growing up in the US, when I was going through the college application process, my criteria for school is that I didn't want to ever attend a football game. I never wanted to be in a lecture hall where the professor didn't know my name. And I never wanted to take a class I didn't feel like taking if I was going to be spending the exorbitant amount of money that American universities spend. I had no idea about art and design school, but as I started flipping through college books, it kind of naturally narrowed down into that I've always been into all kinds of creative things. And so I kind of fell into it, and there was no career plan and there was no goals in mind. And so when I went to design school, I had been doing a lot of photography. I had already been spending all of my free time in the darkroom lab, and I really wanted to become a photojournalist. I go to art school for this. And in my first year at CCA, there was a pinup in the kind of student hallway where we always had work on display. And it was something called a user research class, where the problem for designers to solve for was how to get kids to be more active to combat childhood obesity through design. And it was something that was part of an interaction design program. And I had never heard the term before, and I didn't know what user research was, and I didn't own a smartphone. But that day, I just changed my major on the spot because I thought that that was so powerful that I could help people and do things in a creative way, but in the same way I could use all different types of creative outlets and not just be defined to one kind of craft or medium. And so that's kind of where it all started for me. Honestly, I feel incredibly lucky for one, going to the only design school in the US that had an undergrad program in IXD or UX design. That was the first of its kind. It was the second year or third year of that program ever existing. So there is a lot of it that is luck. And I think also what I really loved about it is having gone to school, design school in San Francisco, was that there were a ton of internships available to me because I was just surrounded by agencies and companies and startups, and it was such kind of a hiring boom. And so the entire time that I was having this amazing design education, I was also working. By the time I took my first design job, I had done 7 internships. I think that internships are the most important thing for your career. I think that they are more important than design school. They're more important than a mentorship. They're more important than your first job because you get to sit in the room and you have zero expectations and you just get to listen and learn and watch great designers do great work. So I was going to design school and I had this kind of itch that I wanted to go abroad before it was thesis year. And your thesis is when you're really supposed to put your mark on like, who are you as a designer? What do you stand for? And I took that seriously as all 20-year-olds should take because I was defining my future in this one project. And I felt like, how am I supposed to say what I stand for as a designer and what I want to do? I'm still just learning this thing and I'm loving it, but I don't know what my design values are, my design craft is. And so I told my parents I was taking a gap year. In reality, I dropped out of school and I set up design internships and apprenticeships in different cities around the world because I was just curious, like, what is this design thing really about? So I spent the first third of the year at IDEO in Chicago, where I was doing an internship working on the Apple Watch had just come out at the time. So it was all kinds of thing around how to do blood glucose monitoring for diabetics using smartwatches. Then I moved to London for a third of the year where I was working on the AdSense tool and how to onboard small, medium-sized businesses. And then I moved to The Hague in the Netherlands where I was working at a 2-person graphic design conceptual studio where I was doing interactive installations using creative coding about what is the future of paper in the world of graphic design. That year changed my life and I think put me on this trajectory where I was like, I want to live abroad. I want to work with smart, interesting people. And I never really want to have a plan. I kind of just want to keep following and chasing interesting projects.
One of the coolest things about being friends with you over the years is that you seem to always be in a place, in a position where you are in a very strategic design role. And I think that that is something that is always a challenge for designers because most designers find themselves, especially in the early years, I can even speak for myself, making PowerPoint presentations for a marketing team in a consulting firm or working under another designer, literally pushing pixels. It takes years and years to put yourself in the position and have the confidence to really command these types of roles. I remember when you and I first met almost a decade ago, and I learned about your story. I was so impressed that you were able to set yourself up in this way. So what I would love to learn from you, and I am sure all of our listeners would love to learn from you, is how do you find these opportunities? How do you strategically position yourself?
I think I would start with like, what is design strategy? And oftentimes what I hear from designers is that they actually want to be decision makers. And that strategy means you get to make the decisions. And I think that's rarely, if ever, true. And I think it's also maybe I would say it's the wrong goal to have because I think you'll just burn yourself out. Everyone wants that ideal place where like there's great design leadership and I get to own my projects and define the briefs and things like that. And that doesn't happen outside of design school. We all work with other people. I'm sure that the product person wants to be fully in charge and have everything be easy and their roadmap be totally resolved. And the engineering manager wants to be able to choose every Jira ticket for their team. So like everyone wants to be the decision maker. That's just not what work looks like because we collaborate. We work with other people. We're part of teams. I think that design, what I have always aimed for and been interested in is being a design facilitator on strategic conversations and topics. And I think what I'm interested in is tricking people who think that design is a time waster into liking design without knowing they've even tried it. And I'm interested in making people question everything they know and love. Basically, it's just like little sister energy, I think. But what I do, I'm never the decision maker in the room. Like, and the more deep I go into my career, the less of a decision maker I ever am because the more senior my VPs and stakeholders have gotten. And then my role as shaper of the conversation, shaper of the foundations has become more important. And the same way I approach design projects is the same way I've approached design career, which is the same way I approach designing my life, which is that I have no plan and no goals, but I really believe in the process. And I believe that good process will garner good results. And if I'm doing the right things, I'll end up in interesting places. And it hasn't failed me yet. So I kind of just stick with it.
So you talk about good process. What would you say is the recipe that you've seen from designers that you interview, from just another designer with just another framer portfolio to someone that you say, wow, this is a designer I want on my team? Specifically, what are the things that you look for?
We are a design strategy and innovation lab, which means that I'm looking for a certain profile. And I think one of the things I struggle with most as a hiring manager is I meet incredible product designers regularly, but we work in a bit of a different way. And I'm looking for a bit of a unique skill set. That being said, I think that most design managers have a specific profile or characteristic in mind. I mean, if you're building an absolute team from scratch, you have more room to play. But if you have an existing team, you're complementing who's already there and you're mapping out based on these skill sets, what do I need more of? What do I need less of? And so part of it is that I think hiring managers put out these super generic product design descriptions, and then people respond with super generic portfolios, and everyone is in a guessing game of like, what do you want and what do I have? And that doesn't help anyone. So I think that the first thing is actually really looking at the job description, and hiring managers need to be better at the job descriptions they write. So for instance, one of the roles I just hired for, I put out with the title of visual designer. That's not the title on the contract. That's not going to be their title on LinkedIn when they work here. They're going to be a product designer. But I know that I needed someone with an excellent level of craft. That's what I emphasized. And yes, all the other stuff matters, but this idea that someone's like this perfect round circle generalist isn't there. So first, actually read the job description and respond to it. Is this B2C or B2B? Is this a large corporate company? Is this a startup? Those need wildly different portfolio projects and of wildly different expectations, which is why it also is like, I'll give you tips on what my exact process looks like. But for another team, this process would maybe make zero sense. And just to kind of give some example, if someone is applying for a product team in a large corporate company, I want to understand, can you work with an existing design system? Can you work with the requirements? Are you thinking about A/B testing? Are you having a more metrics mindset? Can you really think about the refinement of projects and ideas? If it's in a startup, then it's, okay, what's your appetite for chaos? Can you do 0 to 1? What's the kind of scope you can work with? How closely can you sit with engineers? Are you comfortable working without a design system? So that checklist I'm going through is so completely different. When it comes to strategic designers, what I want to understand is, where do you drive and where do you shape? How do you do that? And how is it going to change every project you get? Because every project will be different, every stakeholder will be different.
I could not agree more with you on that. I see so many portfolios that go through a process that we've all learned in some UX course or some interaction design course that we've taken. And to see that you checked that off, cool. But I want to see how you thought about a flow. So show me a user flow, but zoom into one specific point and show me the decision tree of how you got to a specific screen that you saw. To your point about visual design, I think it's something that's becoming more and more and more important, even with design systems that came, UI kits that came, AI that will give you some high fidelity screen. If you are not a strong visual designer, it is very difficult to fully communicate. I can tell you for my team as well, the presentation that you show us, it better be clean. Like, do not show me something sloppy. I cannot take you seriously. I think so many people forget that and just waste all their time applying to jobs when they should be spending time just giving us a clean, visually solid piece of work, one project, super tight. That's what I want to see. Tell me specifically, what does a visually solid portfolio or project in a portfolio review with a hiring manager look like?
clean and solid is the foundation. I think 90% of the candidates I reject on first glance is because the lack of visual design skills. It's so difficult to hire anyone who has foundational visual design. And I say this as someone who comes from a user research creative coding background. I did not study graphic design. I do not think it's one of my strong suits, but clean and polished is an absolute requirement, even if you're a UX designer, even if you're a user researcher, even if you're a content designer. The amount of toolkits out there, I also think that there isn't an excuse for it to not be there, because is to work with patterns. I'm not expecting you to design it yourself. What I find interesting is that designers are incredible at their projects, and then they get to their portfolio and they just like alt delete everything they've ever learned about design because they're so flustered and frustrated by the process of creating a design portfolio that they're just like, oh, I hate this. I want to like apply for this job, whatever. I'm going to throw something together. And it's like, let's take a step back. So what clean and design is, first of all, I need to have a story that I can follow. What was the project? What is your company? Like, if I don't know it, you need to walk me through it. What is your team within the company? Who were you working with? What's the timeline of the project? And then what was the starting point? Did you have a brief? Did you have a feature that already existed? Was there a known user problem? Was this a top-down request? I need context. I want it in one slide and I want it in 30 seconds because none of this changes my opinion about your work, but it helps me understand your work. So I need to get taken into this journey. Case study is not project documentation. I don't need to know everything you did in the project. I don't need every step of the way. I don't need every nuance and detail. I need concrete examples that you're able to think through different problems. And so, one, show me how you get started. Super important and interesting. Two, show me what happens when things go wrong. Three, show me what happens when you need to do solution design and refinement. Four, show me what collaboration looks like on a project like this. Each of these can be small little capsules. I don't need multiple examples, but I need you to kind of hit those high notes. And then remember that this is a presentation. Reduce the text, reduce the amount of images. One prototype is fine. People just overdo it because they're trying to show everything that they've done. But you have to remember, this isn't a project presentation. You're presenting your design skills, and those are two different things to accomplish.
I'll tell you, one of the best portfolio presentations I ever saw, and I, of course, ended up hiring this guy who now works in our studio, was so simple. And this guy, he's a strong visual designer. He's not the best visual designer. We have visual designers on our team that are awesome. And so when we work with him, he'll work with one of the visual designers from our studio team and create something amazing together. But I will never forget his portfolio review, the way he told the story, the simplicity of what he showed. It was, to your point, one prototype. He had some great motion and animations, but things that were pretty out of the box. Figma tutorial could show you how to do, but it was the way that the work was explained. And it was a very small feature because it was actually an AI feature for a dashboard for a smart car. He was coming from a big automotive company where he was on the AI team. And after the call, I remember telling him, I actually don't have a head count for you, because he just kind of reached out to me, someone I worked with at Microsoft back in the day, but I'm going to find something for you because this is awesome. And ultimately, because we do a lot of studio work and you guys are an innovation lab, and I imagine it's a lot of rapid prototyping and testing different concepts, it's very similar in the nature of the type of work that's done. This idea of being a strong storyteller, and we hear it over and over again, cannot be emphasized enough. It's interesting to hear, even internally, not just in the studio agency world, it still holds very true. Tell me, with the new tooling that has come out, a lot of people say that the jobs that were once available to junior designers are becoming obsolete. In the words of the VP design at Wise, he said that AI is going to make good designers better and bad designers faster. Tell me your perspective on this.
I agree with that sentiment for sure. I think, first of all, with this fear of AI removing design jobs, reality is that the COVID-based economy and cost of lending essentially is what has removed design jobs. So there's this like abject feel like, oh my God, there's no design jobs anymore. I haven't seen or heard of any design organization that's actually gone through transformational change based on AI tools yet. I think there's a split, there's two levels to the problem. So one, when it comes to early career professionals, I see a complete lack of kind of junior positions and also internships available, which I mentioned earlier. I think internships are the most important and formative times in your career. And so the lack of those to me is actually the scariest thing because you need that kind of space to learn and develop. However, when it comes to I think that it is a universal risk to designers, and being a principal by no means makes you safer than the person who's coming out of design school. Because the question is not how good of a designer you are, the question is what is your appetite for change? How much energy are you going to invest to learning on the side? How much of a hustler do you want to be? Because yes, our toolings and our processes are about to be upended if they aren't already. Like everything is going through a blender right now. I feel very optimistic and excited about what's on the other side, and I'm excited for that journey. But if your mentality is, I've been doing this for 15 years, I know my stuff, I think that you have a much greater risk than the design student who's hungry and wants to learn. That being said, I think that the reason that the junior design jobs have dried up is because people can just hire less headcount, and it's cheaper to hire an expensive, more senior person than to have two junior people who need training. And that will bite design in the ass eventually, the fact that we have no junior talent coming in. And I consistently see that the design community, I think, doesn't set ourselves up for success because, on the one hand, all designers say is, I want a seat at the table and I want to be taken seriously. And then we also say, oh, but you could go to a 6-week boot camp and design is for everyone and you don't need to master the craft. Let's like hop in and just have a 6-figure salary at the end of the day. It's a craft and it's a muscle. And I'm a big believer in the 10,000 hour rule. If you want to be an expert at anything, and that expertise does not need to come from a university, but you need to get in those 10,000 hours anyway. AI tooling does not cheat what those 10,000 hours are. It means that you now need a different 10,000 hours, or that those 10,000 hours look differently than they did 5 years ago. But AI is as important as Figma, but it does not replace Figma. You just need to be an expert at how to use it.
I completely agree, especially with what you said about the 10,000 hours and really mastering the craft. Someone that I came in contact with when I first opened up my studio told me that hiring is like this bell curve, right? You have a few junior, really early in career level designers. I don't even like to call them junior. I say early in career because, it can be early in your career, no matter what age or what stage. Then you have most of your team kind of sitting in that middle. So, mid senior level, maybe some early seniors. We actually break it down into 6 levels at Flexi. And then kind of at the end of the bell curve, you maybe have one really senior, one principal level designer that you have on your team that works on strategic clients that really need that level of expertise, and also mentor earlier in career designers. And that's kind of how we think about our hiring. But also, a lot of our hiring has to do with the demand of our clients. So if we're working with one of our partners, we need to hire a more senior designer. Whereas some of our other clients, they need someone who might be a strong visual designer and maybe the budget isn't as high. So we can go with someone who's earlier in career but has a lot of potential and is willing to learn and be hungry. We're actually going through the first promotion cycle right now with one of our designers now that we've been around like a year and a half. But we actually hired a designer who, I saw her portfolio. I said, she is one of the most creative people I've ever worked with. Her presentation skills, not as strong. The product design skills, the foundations were there, but they were developing. And you see her then and you see her now in all of those areas I mentioned. And it's a totally different designer. And it's been really, really cool to see. I'm curious, when you see a diamond in the rough like that, like, what are you really evaluating for?
I would choose a diamond in the rough over like the polished most senior designer any day because I'm most interested in their curiosity and their drive and the work ethic. And I think also for the type of strategic innovation based work we do, their risk appetite or chaos appetite, I should say. So much of design, at least, I mean, I'm working in a large corporate company. So much of design, being a successful designer, has nothing to do with design work. But especially the space of design industry where everything's about to change, how am I possibly supposed to evaluate a designer for a job that I don't know what it's going to look like in the next 2 years. I want the person who's going to go with the flow and who's going to learn a lot and who's going to teach me a lot, much more than I want the person who has expert at everything, but is also kind of resigned to their kind of process and their kind of way of working. How do I spot it? I think that one, it's a question of like, what have they been up to? I think that that's a really great indicator. Have they worked on a lot of stuff? Have they worked on a lot of side projects? Do they have kind of a creative practice outside of the job? Have they switched teams? Have they switched products? Are they interested in going to meetups or mentorship on the side? I want to be really clear. It's not about being an extrovert versus an introvert. It's not an energy or a communication style thing, but it's this question of, are you doing that extra 10, 20%? Not in the sense of I take on a higher workload, but I have a more fuller, rounder life in design outside of just the like 9 to 5 that I need to be working. I think that that helps clue me in. Also, I think at this stage with kind of AI tooling, it's also just comes out when I talk to people in interviews, hey, are you trying stuff out? Everyone should be trying stuff out right now, not because there's anything so important to learn, in my personal opinion, but because you need to learn how to learn with AI and that you need to be having like a testing early adopter mindset.
I could not agree with you more on the idea that this excitement and this curiosity breeds excellence when it comes to seeing the actual output of the work. I can think about designers that have come through our studio that have that and ones that kind of came through and didn't. And it really is such a world apart. I remember when I was working at Microsoft in our design studio, because a lot of the really, really great ones actually came from studios. Like that was their first job out of design school. And I think the thing that it taught people was to be curious because you are oftentimes switching projects and clients. Maybe 3 months you're working in automotive, and the next 3 months you're working in healthcare, and 3 months afterwards you're working on a real estate tech project, right? So you have to kind of get curious quickly. And a lot of designers start out freelancing. You really see that the ones that kind of end up, unless you got really lucky, like I have to say I did. I never did that early in my career. And I think now I'm making up for it later on in my career is having the ability to work on different things. And that diversity and that curiosity really does give you that 10,000 hours to become an expert in the craft.
To me, what was so invaluable is that in design school, there is such an ivory tower mindset around IDEO and Google, as those are the absolute pinnacles, those are the most important companies, the best designers. The biggest value for me is that I could demystify that really early on and see how human just everyone is at jobs. And yes, I worked with really smart, interesting people, but I also work with really smart, interesting people at Zalando and at Klarna and at the startups I've been at that like probably no one has ever heard of. And can I say that they were such wildly different when it comes to talent? No. I think IDEO was the most wonderful nerds that I've ever, like design nerds. Everyone had crazy like side hobbies and everyone was geeking out about stuff. And that was the most creative, inspiring environment I'd ever been in. But I think it gave me this permission to stop thinking that based on the company you work at, you have it figured out. And what I saw most about the designers I respected is that they had their own drive that was fueling their design work and motivating them. But the way that they invested in their own creativity, it was clear that there was something else cooking and something else going on. I don't think it has to be that you're doing a million things, and it definitely shouldn't be that you're doing a million things at a really shallow level, right? I don't freelance on the side because I like biking, and any moment that I cannot look at a laptop is like an ideal moment for me. So it's not that I think you have to be working insane hours and working yourself to the bone, but I think what's the thing that gets you excited, and how can I see that in the thing that excites you, you really invest in it. Because if you're not investing in the stuff you personally find exciting, how are you going to invest in the job, which like is probably not going to be your number one priority in life or at every single part of the day? We all have to work on projects we don't like and with setups that are challenging. That's that's the job, that's life. And so how do I know you're going to bring in a great energy to that when the things you really care about, you're maybe not bringing that energy to? So I think that's just one of the things that kind of helps me suss out investment appetite.
So, when you were looking at these internships, and I think this is something that, again, if we're getting to the specifics and how can people replicate this in today's environment, what did you do to reach out to these companies or to find these opportunities?
So for a lot of the internships, just cold recruiting. Honestly, couldn't tell you what was in the portfolio. I'm sure it's very embarrassing now. IDEO, I remember absolutely how I got it. IXDA was in San Francisco that year, so it was a fortuitous event. One of the design directors tweeted out like, "Hey, I'm at this IXDA happy hour. Anyone around want to chat?" I was with a fellow classmate of mine who followed him on Twitter, and we like rocked up to this table of IDEO designers. And I don't remember what we talked about. I think at the time I was 3D printing I was trying to represent different songs I love through 3D printed artifacts. And the conversation kind of organically went from there. Again, it was an instance of, I mean, now reflecting on it, we didn't talk about the work. We talked about my creativity and excitement. Maybe that worked. I have no idea. So I think that's probably what it was. I think that what is helpful now is that when I do apply to jobs, I really apply to very few. And I am really only applying for jobs that I care about and have thought through. And I think that that also shows when you're presenting. I see some people on posts on LinkedIn, I've applied to 300 jobs and I haven't gotten a single one. And granted, like, I understand that there is a privilege in me saying this as someone who's currently employed when so many people have been impacted by layoffs and it's a really tough and difficult hiring scene. So we are not in a luxurious position of having so many jobs out there. But I also do think that if you're spreading yourself thin and applying to everything, there's no way that you set yourself up for success in those interviews. Because, like I mentioned, the company size and the way of the teams working on the topic there are going to be so varied and different. I can't imagine that anyone has a custom portfolio case study for every type of situation. It's just not possible. And so spending 2 weeks getting your portfolio ready for that one or two companies you're really excited about, see how it goes, and then go on to the next, I think you're going to get a lot better results than just everything that's on LinkedIn going boom, boom, boom.
And I think to add to your point, so we have been recruiting for a couple positions right now. And I checked our backend database. We have gotten 1,700 applications in the last 3 weeks that it's been posted. But I've probably had maybe 10 people slide through my emails. And I don't get that many emails, right? Like maybe I get, I don't know, 30 or 40 a day, and half of them are like things I need to unsubscribe to. But all the people that have personally emailed me, I have sent over to our operations manager and I've said, look at this person's portfolio. And we've actually interviewed one of those people. And it's the only interview I've had just because we've been dealing with some different priorities right now. Hiring is one of them, but we're actually going to start looking at portfolios next week. So just expressing your interest, finding the person's email. It's not that hard to find, sliding into your DMs over email, which isn't as saturated as like even a LinkedIn inbox these days, if filtered well, can be super effective. And I always appreciate it. Even if like the portfolio isn't great, I'll always take a look at it because that person made the effort to write the email, find me, and send it over. So I think just to kind of wrap up all this advice that you've given so far, being very targeted about the companies that you care about, expressing interest, finding a way to reach out to them personally, not being offended if they don't respond back because you never know what people are going through in their life. And then just in the meantime, finding things that you're curious and passionate about, fewer things better, but showing that curiosity, showing that passion through side projects, which, by the way, is how we ended up recruiting our early in career designer. She had an amazing side project that she showed, and that's why we hired her. And really just, following the passion, all while making sure, and we'll emphasize this, both Rachel and I are like ride or die on this, which is making sure your visual design skills are at a certain level. So, Rachel, what are some of the libraries or some of the templates or some of the resource hubs that people can go to when creating a portfolio presentation or creating a case study presentation?
I do think What helps me the most is that all of my portfolio case studies start on a blank Google Doc. Like I always have an outline first. What are the points I want to hit? Then, I mean, now most recently, I then take these outlines and already I am getting feedback and reiterating them on different AI agents to get feedback on the outline before I even touch design. I also go through and collect all the assets and artifacts that I think would demonstrate each of those. Basically, what I'm trying to say is as much prep work as possible before you touch the slides. Because the biggest mistake I think is that you first of all start with the visual design, because how do you know what the right visual design is if you don't know the story you want to tell? Again, I think it goes back to this like designers know what great design looks like, and we kind of just forget it all when we have to design our own case studies. But like substance first, then we think about how to present it. That's super key. And also the right framing is going to matter on what are the assets that I want to show. Is it more service design work? Is it more prototyping? That's going to have a very different design layout. So I have to kind of have that nailed down. I wouldn't just start thinking into the slides and typing stuff because you're going to get twisted. And that's, I think, where things get really jumbled and really messy in your story because you need to have that clean story established first.
I couldn't agree more with you. And this is a point that I'm definitely gonna emphasize throughout this podcast is having your process down first, which is one of the first things you said, having a really strong process, having your thinking clear so that all of the visuals can be clean behind it. And regardless if you use templates, it doesn't really matter. I think having a really strong reference, which is something we always do whenever we start a website project or a product design project, having those references, having a really clear outline of the different points you want to hit is going to be, super, super important to having a strong and clean portfolio. And more than anything, just looking at the backgrounds of people that have been successful in their design careers and looking at their visual aesthetic and using that as a reference point. To get those 10,000 hours, oftentimes it's replication before innovation. So just repeating like great patterns that you see off people you admire, and then starting to build your own once you start to get that foundation and that visual skill set, I think can also really, really help people. So what is the one thing that you are most excited about that you are working on today?
So I think what's been most exciting this past year is that just about a year ago, Zalando opened a new research and development lab in Shenzhen, China. And so we've been setting up the design organization there. And we worked with a really wonderful design agency in Shanghai who helped us get a lot of foundational understanding of the Chinese market, working with some incredible designers from China. And we're really looking about social e-commerce trends in China and what that kind of means for a European audience. And I am a big believer in the design futurism quote that the future never arrives, it's just currently happening somewhere else. And I think that oftentimes we get so wrapped up in what is the tech and when is the tech going to be good that we completely forget that the future has been designed and is already being pressure tested by user groups in all different kind of situations. Thinking about mobile fluency in Africa, thinking about social e-commerce in China, thinking about banking in Latin America. There are so many ways that we can get inspired by the future that as designers, you have control over because it's not based on how good is the underlying tech that another team is working on, but it's about how innovative, interesting, and meaningful are the experiences that you're designing and crafting. And there, I think a more ethnographic approach is the key to it. And so working with the China team has been so interesting and exciting. And I think that's where I'm most excited.
Super interesting. I love what you said, and I think this is the perfect point to close out on. Rachel, thank you so much for your time. If our listeners want to get in touch with you and continue the conversation on anything that we said, what is the best way to do so?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably always the best. You can also write me on my website, rachelrosenson.com. But yeah, shoot me on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's always fun catching up with you. Really appreciate you taking the time to share all your insights with our listeners on Flexible by Design, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks.